All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look back at a phone that hit the scene back in May 2020, the Realme X3 SuperZoom.
Ah, yeah, the X3 SuperZoom.
We're going to be dissecting a review from RechargeMyTopup.com, and our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to see if this phone can still hang in 2025.
You know, it's always interesting to revisit older phones. It gives us a chance to really see how tech evolves, especially in a market as fast-paced as smartphones.
So true. So let's start with the basics, the design. The review mentions a glass front and back aluminum frame, comes in Arctic white or Glacier blue. Pretty standard stuff even back then, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Though, you have to remember, back in 2020, not everyone was doing the whole glass sandwich design, especially in the mid-range. So it was still a pretty sleek look for its time.
Okay, point taken. So, design-wise, maybe not totally groundbreaking, but not bad either. But what about the display?
Now, the display is where things start to get interesting. We're talking a 6.6-inch Full HD plus IPS LCD, 120 Hz refresh rate.
Whoa, okay, hold on. 120 hertz. Back in 2020, that's still pretty high even by today's standards.
Yeah.
Especially for a mid-range phone.
Right. Imagine, scrolling through those social media feeds or playing a game with that kind of smoothness. Even back then, that would help super premium.
Yeah, I can definitely see the appeal there. But a silky smooth screen isn't going to matter much if the phone itself is chugging along, right? So tell me about the performance. What's under the hood?
Well, we've got a Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 plus chipset, which, for context, was basically top of the line for Android phones back in 2020, flagship level stuff.
Okay, so not bad at all for the time. But now it's 2025. I mean, hasn't that chip been completely lapped by now? Wouldn't it feel like ancient compared to the processors in phones today?
Well, yeah, there's no denying that newer chips have definitely surpassed the 855 plus set. Like, the Snapdragon 895 or even the 900 series. They're offering significant jumps in processing power, better graphics, AI performance, the whole shebang.
Right, so the 855 Plus is definitely showing its age a bit. But I guess we should also consider this phone did come with up to 12 GB of RAM. So maybe that helps balance things out a little.
Yeah, the RAM definitely helps with multitasking and running those more demanding apps. But we'll definitely have to dig deeper into how that 855 Plus holds up in a head-to-head against today's mid-rangers.
For sure. Okay, so decent performance for its time, but maybe not a speed demon by today's standards. But hey, let's be real. A lot of people were probably drawn to this phone for one main reason. The camera system. I mean, SuperZoom. It's right there in the name. What can you tell us about it?
So they really went all out with the camera system on this one. We're talking a quad camera setup on the back, 64 MP primary sensor.
Okay. Starting strong, but megapixels aren't everything, are they?
Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
But, back then having a 64 MP sensor was a big deal, especially in the mid-range. You got those nice, sharp, detailed images.
For sure. But what else do they pack in there?
Well, you also get an 8MP ultra-wide lens.
Yeah.
For capturing those expansive scenes. Plus, they even threw in a 2MP macro lens. For those extreme close-up shots.
Okay, starting to sound pretty versatile. But, Simon, spill the beans. What about that super zoom? What's the deal with that telephoto lens?
All right. Here's the main attraction. You get an 8MP periscope telephoto lens, offering 5x optical zoom.
5 times optical zoom. Not too shabby at all. But there's more, right? It wouldn't be a super zoom without a little extra something special.
You're absolutely right. Hold on to your hats because this thing boasts up to 60x digital zoom.
60x, wow. I mean, how often do you actually get to use that kind of zoom on a phone?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was definitely a standout feature for its time, especially for a mid-ranger. But, digital zoom is not always the most practical, especially at those higher levels. You start to lose a lot of detail. We'll have to see how that feature's relevance has held up over the years.
Definitely. All right, so impressive camera specs on paper. We'll have to see how they translate into real-world performance in 2025. But what about the front-facing camera? Is it going to make us all look like we're stuck in 2020?
They didn't skimp on the selfie camera either. You get a dual front-facing camera setup, 32MP primary sensor, plus they even threw in an 8MP ultra-wide lens, so, you can fit all your friends in those group selfies.
Oh, nice. So definitely well-equipped for those Instagram-worthy moments, even back then. Okay, so we've covered design, display, performance, and those impressive cameras, but all this tech, it's got to be a battery drainer, right? Especially with that 120 hertz display.
Well, the phone does have a 4200 milliamp battery, which, was pretty decent for a 2020 phone. But battery tech has also come a long way since then.
Right. Phones these days, they're packing much larger batteries. So I'm wondering if 4200 mAh would even cut it in 2025, especially with that power-hungry 120 Hz display.
Yeah, that's a valid point. We'll have to look into how that battery capacity stacks up against today's usage patterns. And, keep in mind, the 855 plus processor, while powerful, it wasn't exactly known for its energy efficiency.
All right, so battery life may be a potential weakness. We'll have to dive deeper into that. So we've covered a lot of ground already. Design, display, performance, the camera system, all pretty impressive for a phone from 2020. But anything else notable, or are we just talking the basic features here?
Let's see, you've got your dual-band Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 5.0, GPS, USB Type-C port, side-mounted fingerprint scanner, all pretty much standard fare even for today. But there is one feature that might surprise you.
Okay, let me guess. Did they, build in a time machine or something?
Not quite a time machine, but it does still have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack.
Wait, seriously, a headphone jack? In 2020, I thought those went extinct years ago.
You're telling me. It's definitely a rare sight these days. So for those who haven't fully embraced the wireless audio world, maybe still clinging to those trusty wired headphones, this could be a major selling point, a blast from the past.
Wow, that's wild. I mean, I kind of miss that satisfying click of plugging in headphones. Okay, before I get too lost in nostalgia, let's talk software. What version of Android are we dealing with here? Are we stuck in the digital stone age with, Android 10?
Well, it originally shipped with Android 10 and Realme UI on top. And yeah, Android 10, that's definitely a few generations behind by now.
Right, so we're talking about a phone that's running 5-year-old software. I mean, that has to have some implications for the user experience, right?
Absolutely. I mean, while Realme UI is known for being pretty customizable, adding some extra features and whatnot, the real question is whether Realme has, continued to support this model with software updates. Because running such an old version of Android in 2025, that could mean missing out on crucial security updates, not to mention all the new features that have come out since then.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Security updates, they're not just about getting the latest bells and whistles. They're also about keeping your data safe. So using a phone with an outdated operating system, it could potentially put you at risk.
Right, exactly. I mean, if Realme hasn't released any security patches for this model in the past few years, it could be more vulnerable to, malware or hacking attempts.
So, okay, maybe not a complete dinosaur, but potentially a bit behind the times when it comes to software. All right, so far we've uncovered a lot about the Realme X3 SuperZoom. The good, the maybe not so good, and the surprisingly retro. Let's do a quick recap, shall we? What are the pros and cons we've identified so far?
Sure. On the plus side, we've got that great performance thanks to the Snapdragon 855 plus LOMs, even if it's a bit long in the tooth now. And of course, that 12 GB of RAM definitely helps keep things moving.
Right. And that camera system, particularly that periscope telephoto lens with 5x optical zoom and 60x digital zoom, that's still pretty impressive.
Yeah, for sure. And let's not forget that gorgeous 120 Hz display. That's still a major plus, even by today's standards.
And that headphone jack. Seriously, headphone jack in 2020, color me impressed. Okay, but no phone is perfect, right? What are some of the downsides we've uncovered so far?
Well, battery life could be a concern, especially for heavy users. That 4,200 mAh battery might struggle to keep up with those demands, especially with the 120 Hz display always on. Plus, there's no expandable storage, so you're limited to the built-in 256 GB.
Okay, so some potential trade-offs there. So it sounds like the Realme X3 SuperZoom, it's got a mixed bag, even for its time. I mean, it's got some serious strengths, but also some weaknesses.
Exactly. And the big question is, do those strengths still hold up in 2025? Is this phone a hidden gem or just a relic of the past? That's what we'll be tackling in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back, everyone. So we've established that the Realme X3 SuperZoom is a pretty decent phone back in 2020, but now we got to ask the tough question. How does it stack up in 2025?
Yeah, that's the real test, isn't it? To really gauge its relevance today, we got to see how it compares to what else is out there in the market.
All right, so let's pretend we're in the market for a new phone right now. We're browsing online, maybe looking to spend, around $300, give or take. And we stumble across this Realme X3 SuperZoom. What are our other options in that price range? What are we up against?
Well, in that price range, you'd probably be seeing a lot of newer mid-range models.
Yeah.
From brands like Xiaomi, Samsung, probably even some newer brands that have popped up in the last few years. Lots of competition.
Right. And those newer phones, they'd all be rocking the latest processors, wouldn't they? Wouldn't that Snapdragon 855 Plus in the Realm feel pretty sluggish compared to those?
Yeah, you'd likely be seeing processors like the Snapdragon 895 or even the 900 series in some of those newer phones. Those newer chips, they offer some pretty significant improvements, in processing power, graphics performance, AI capabilities, the whole nine yards.
So the realm would be at a disadvantage there. What about other areas like the camera? Smartphone camera tech, it's come a long way, even just in the last few years.
Oh, absolutely. In 2025, you're seeing features like improved computational photography, more advanced AI scene recognition, some mid-range phones are even pushing the boundaries with optical zoom capabilities.
Okay, computational photography. That's one of those terms I hear thrown around a lot, but I'm not entirely sure I understand what it means. Can you break that down for me?
Sure. So basically, computational photography, it uses software algorithms to enhance the image quality. Going beyond what the hardware alone can do. It's like having a built-in photo editor that's automatically tweaking your photos for better color, sharpness, detail, all that good stuff.
So are we saying that even with that impressive periscope lens, the Realm's photos wouldn't look as good as those from a newer phone with, all that advanced computational photography?
It's not necessarily about one being better than the other. It's more about different approaches, really. The Realme, it relies more on the optical capabilities of its lens, that periscope design, the zoom capabilities. While newer phones, they're often combining good hardware with really powerful software processing.
So maybe that 60x digital zoom on the Realm, it's not as much of a game changer as it seemed at first.
Yeah, that's a fair point. While having that zoom option is definitely cool, you might actually get better overall results from a newer phone, even with a lower optical zoom. All thanks to those advancements in computational photography.
Okay, I'm starting to see how the Realm might be showing its age a bit. What about battery life? We talked earlier about how that could be a potential weakness. Would those newer phones have a big advantage there?
Yeah, battery technology, it's also evolved quite a bit. In those newer mid-range phones, you'd probably be seeing larger battery capacities, faster charging speeds, just all-around improvements in battery management.
So the Realm's 4,200 mAh battery and 30W fast charging, they might not cut it in 2025.
It really depends on your usage habits. If you're a heavy user, constantly streaming video, playing games, using power-hungry apps, you might find yourself reaching for the charger more often with the Realme.
All right, so maybe not the best battery life. Potentially outmatched in processing power and camera software. But hey, it does have that gorgeous 120 hertz display and the surprisingly resilient headphone jack. Do those count for anything in 2025?
Absolutely. That 120 Hz display, it's still a feature that many users would appreciate. Even on newer phones, that level of smoothness is considered premium. And that headphone jack, while it feels kind of retro now, it could be a major selling point for some people. There's still a segment of users who just prefer wired audio or haven't fully embraced the wireless world.
So it sounds like the Realme X3 SuperZoom is kind of a mixed bag in 2025.
Yeah.
It's got some features that still hold up, but it's also clearly been surpassed in other areas.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's not a bad phone at all, but it's important to be realistic about its limitations.
So if I found this phone for sale today, would you recommend it? Or should I just go for a newer model?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It really depends on your individual needs and priorities. What are you looking for in a phone? What's your budget? All those factors come into play.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. What kind of person would still find the Realme X3 SuperZoom a good buy in 2025?
Well, someone who values a smooth display and isn't too concerned about having the absolute latest processor, they might still find this phone enjoyable to use. Especially if they can find it at a good price, a significant discount compared to newer models.
The budget-conscious buyers could be a good fit.
Definitely. And anyone who really loves that headphone jack, they might find this phone tempting. Plus, those zoom capabilities, even with the limitations we talked about, they could still be attractive to some users.
Okay, so it's not totally irrelevant in 2025, but it's definitely not for everyone.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes these deep dives so interesting. We're not just looking at specs on paper. We're considering how technology evolves, how consumer needs change, and how a phone that was once a top contender can, find a new niche over time.
I like that. It's like a little tech history lesson, but also a reminder that new doesn't always equal better, right?
Well said. And speaking of history, let's shift gears a bit and talk about that software experience. We mentioned earlier that this phone originally shipped with Android 10.
Right, and I remember you saying that running such an old Android version in 2025, it could be a problem. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Of course. In the tech world, software updates, they're crucial. And it's not just about getting new features, it's about security too. As operating systems get older, they become more vulnerable to security threats.
So, using a phone with an outdated operating system could actually put my data at risk.
It's a possibility. If Realme hasn't released any security updates for this model in the past few years, it could be more susceptible to, malware, hacking attempts, things like that.
Okay, that's a serious concern. So before even considering this phone, I'd have to do some digging, see if Realme's continue to provide any kind of software support for it.
Exactly. It's always a good idea to check for software updates, even on older phones. You might be surprised, the manufacturer might have released updates that bring it closer to the latest Android version.
Fingers crossed. All right, so we've talked about how the Realme X3 SuperZoom stacks up against the competition in 2025. We've discussed the potential risks of running that older Android version. But there's one more aspect I think we need to consider, the overall user experience.
Yeah, that's an important point. Beyond all the specs and features, how does this phone actually feel to use in 2025?
All right, let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone using this phone today. What's that experience actually like? All right, so we've talked about how the Realme X3 SuperZoom stacks up against the competition in 2025. We've discussed those potential risks of running that older Android version. But there's one more thing, one more piece of the puzzle, and that's the user experience. Beyond specs and features, how does this phone actually feel to use in 2025?
Yeah, that's key, right? Sometimes the feeling of a device, it can be just as important as the tech specs, sometimes even more,
Exactly. So using this phone in 2025, would it feel like, like stepping back in time? Or could it still provide, a satisfying modern smartphone experience?
It's a good question. On the one hand, there's that 120 hertz display. Even today, that's going to feel super smooth and responsive. Imagine scrolling through social media, browsing websites, playing games, all with that level of fluidity. It's pretty nice.
Okay, so smooth display, definitely a plus.
Mm-hmm.
But wouldn't that older processor, the potential for some software lag, wouldn't that create a weird contrast?
Yeah.
Smooth visuals, but then clunky performance.
Yeah, that's where things get a little tricky. While the Snapdragon 855 Plus, it was a beast back in its day, there's no denying it's a few generations behind now. So, yeah, you might run into some lags, some slowdowns, especially when you're running really demanding apps or multitasking, things like that.
But it wouldn't be that seamless, zippy experience that, we've kind of come to expect from modern smartphones.
Probably not consistently, no. And especially, if Realme hasn't been keeping up with software updates, you might hit some compatibility issues with newer apps, or just, some general sluggishness in the interface.
Man, that's a shame because we were really digging that 120 hertz display.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the overall experience, it might be a bit inconsistent, like a mix of modern smoothness and then some frustrating slowdowns.
Yeah, kind of like that. It's almost like finding a classic car, but with a brand new engine. Cool in theory, but maybe not the most practical for everyday driving.
I get that analogy.
Yeah.
All right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Realme X3 SuperZoom, I kind of want to, zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture. What does it tell us about the smartphone industry, as a whole?
I think it really highlights how crazy fast the pace of innovation is in this industry. What was top of the line a few years ago can feel almost obsolete today. The Realme X3 SuperZoom, it's a good reminder that the pursuit of the latest and greatest, it's a never-ending cycle.
It's like we're on this tech treadmill constantly running just to keep up.
Yeah, in a way. But, on the flip side, the Realme X3 SuperZoom also shows that some features, some technologies, they age better than others. That 120 hertz display, for example, it's still desirable even in 2025. And the headphone jack, while it seems kind of retro now, could be a selling point for some.
It's interesting how some features, they almost become nostalgic, like a throwback to a simpler time, But as consumers, how do we navigate this constant churn of technology, this pressure to always upgrade to the newest thing?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I think we need to become more mindful consumers. Instead of just getting swept up in all the hype, take a step back, ask yourself, what do I actually need from a phone? What do I value? Focus on the features that actually enhance your experience and align with how you actually use your phone.
So it's about being intentional with our choices,
right.
Not just blindly chasing the specs or falling for all the marketing hype.
Exactly. It's about finding the right tool for the job, recognizing that the best phone, it isn't always the newest or the most expensive.
That's such a good point. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. We've explored how the Realme X3 SuperZoom holds up in 2025. Let's fast forward a bit. Imagine it's 2030. Do you think a phone like this could still be relevant then?
Whoa, 2030. That's a fascinating thought. I mean, by then, the smartphone landscape, it's probably going to be drastically different. Foldable phones might be the norm. We might have like seamless AR experiences integrated into our devices. Who knows what else we can't even imagine yet.
So in that world of like futuristic tech, would a phone like the Realme X3 SuperZoom, would it be nothing more than a relic of the past?
For most people, probably, yeah. But there's a certain charm to older tech, like a simplicity that might still appeal to some. Like, think about it, like a vintage record player in a world of digital streaming.
It could become like a niche item, like sought after by collectors or people looking for like a digital detox experience.
Right. Or maybe it becomes like a budget-friendly option for, people who just need a basic smartphone. Calls, texts, simple tasks. No need for all the bells and whistles of a 2030 flagship.
It's kind of wild to think that a phone that was once like striving to be cutting edge could end up as like a retro tech curiosity.
It's a good reminder that technology, even with how fast it changes, it leaves behind this fascinating trail of innovation. The story of the smartphone. It's still being written, and who knows what role a phone like the Realme X3 SuperZoom might play in the chapters to come.
That's a great note to end on. Well, everyone, we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring the Realme X3 SuperZoom with us. From its past as a mid-range contender to its potential future as a retro tech gem.
It's been a pleasure, and remember, whether you're thinking about a new phone or just reflecting on how tech has changed, always stay curious.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the world of tech. Thanks for listening.